don't have to wait until you reach financial independence to start enjoying your life. You can do that much earlier and start living a life that you love and that's true to you. Welcome to Freedom Before FI. Using FIRE and life design techniques, we help you create freedom on your way to FI instead of waiting until you're retired to do the things that light you up. I'm your host Greg, a FIRE movement and life design enthusiast. If you're itching to get freedom now, then let's do this. Hello and a good day to you, my friend. Whatever you're up to today, I hope you're doing well. So on the previous episode, I talked about general money mistakes I made on my journey that cost me later on in life. So continuing the theme of personal finance mistakes, I wanted to share some specific purchases and payments that I've made early on that I regret, in the hope that you too might learn some things from it as well, or you could share it with others around you. So I'm going to have to apologise because the majority of the mistakes revolves around cars. So the first one is buying cheap, banged up cars. So when I was around 19 or 20, I passed my driving test, got my licence, and I was super excited. I wanted to get a car ASAP to take my friends around and listen to loud bass music with the windows down. I was still a student at the time, so my budget was minuscule, meaning I was restricted to old second-hand cars. So anyway, I had a specific car in mind, which was an old Volkswagen Polo, basically a small hatchback. However, the problem was I didn't have Volkswagen budget. My already minuscule budget at the time was more Vauxhall, Ford or Fiat. But being young and dumb, I didn't want any of those other cars. So the only way I could afford a Volkswagen was to get an even older, more worn one. And foolishly, that's exactly what I did. I ended up buying this second-hand Volkswagen Polo. It had all sorts of issues that I just overlooked because it was a Volkswagen. I know nowadays VWs are more sort of middle of the range, sort of standard cars, but back then, when you're younger and when you don't have that much money, a Volkswagen is considered a really good car. Anyway, I ended up having to pay more for repairs and maintenance while I was using it. Now my second car purchase was even worse. I did not learn a thing from my first car. Again, I had a student budget and lo and behold, I wanted another Volkswagen. This time it was the big brother of the Polo, the Volkswagen Golf. This car was legendary in Europe back then and I had to have one. Again, same mistake. I did not have Golf money as I was in my early 20s and a student. So I opted for an older second-hand one that had a few issues, and a few issues is saying it mildly. Again, I overlooked some of these issues because obviously it was a Golf and the windows were tinted, it was metallic green, it had shiny rims. Now this was definitely one of those looks over practicality purchases. Because it was cheap and a bit old, the few little issues that it had kind of got worse over time. It even had this engine problem where loads of smoke would come out the exhaust when I was just driving around, leaving cars behind me in big clouds of smoke. Again, I had to pay more for repairs and maintenance while I was using it. Okay, so the lesson here is don't buy things just because of the brand or because it looks good. Make sure the thing you buy actually does what it's supposed to do, which in my case was to get me from A to B with minimal issues and costs. The sensible thing to do would have been to get a lower tier car brand which wasn't as old and had less problems. Anyway, the positive part is I had priceless memories with my friends going on these adventures with those cars, albeit leaving trails of smoke everywhere. Okay, so the next regretful purchase is about cars again, I'm afraid, but this time the opposite end of the scale. Okay, so the second bad purchase was buying a brand new car on finance. So this was when I was in my 20s again, just a caveat. After my first few not so sensible car purchases, I thought, yeah, I deserved a brand new car. I ended up buying what was called a Nissan Qashqai, which I absolutely loved. It was a crossover, meaning it was a blend of a typical sedan and an SUV car. Okay, so the first mistake was I got it on finance. This is where car companies will give you a loan for the car and you pay it back on a monthly basis over a set number of years. Now, the other mistake was I was actually duped into getting this larger car by the friendly salesman, and I was only supposed to get a small car. Anyway, the car was awesome, no issues, and no smoke. But then I started to get more financially savvy at this time, and when I started to look at the numbers more, it didn't stack up. Because the car was on finance, I was actually paying back quite a bit of interest on the loan, on top of the actual base cost of the car itself. Basically, I was paying a lot for a new car and it was just unnecessary. I just needed something to get me to places. Anyway, I ended up selling it for a decent price and I paid off the loan. Okay, so my fourth car was the most sensible. I learned all my lessons by then and I ended up buying a slightly older second-hand Toyota Corolla. It only had one previous owner, it was well looked after, and I even got a mechanic to check it this time. The engine was solid and I bought the car in cash, so there was no expensive interest payments. I had the car for a number of years with pretty much zero issues before moving abroad to the Philippines from the UK. Okay, so the third regretful purchase was paying hefty credit card fees. Now, I never use my credit card to buy things like clothes or furniture, as that's just madness. But sometimes a credit card can be handy, especially when you're traveling, or when you need to make online purchases, as some websites don't accept debit cards. So one thing I learned the hard way was not realizing how high the overdue penalty fees were on my card. So depending on the type of credit card you have, some banks charge you a fixed penalty for having any amount overdue. Now, I usually manage my finances every month, but there were times where, I'd have mad, hectic, busy periods and just not have the time to get to it. So this happened a few times, and when I saw some of the statements, I was a little bit shocked as they seemed a tad bit high. And when I looked into it, it was because there were overdue penalty fees added on. So moral of the story is, check all the fine print of your credit cards, know how much all the fees, interest and penalties are, and make sure you repay anything on time. I didn't really check all of this because I usually pay everything full at the end of each month. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting how high they were. The other thing that would be helpful is if I set up automatic repayments to pay the minimum monthly amounts. Although the bank that I was using at the time here in Philippines didn't have that, which is a little bit odd, so I was stuck with making manual payments. Alright, so I hope you've learned something there from my silly mistakes in the past, and feel free to share this episode with anyone about to buy a car or get a credit card. Now, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider giving the show a 5-star rating on your podcast app and clicking follow if you want more tips about enjoying your journey to FI and life design tips. Have a great rest of the week, and as always, practice gratitude, live life by your design, and do things that make you smile. You got this.